Afternoon. My name is Doug Cluck. I am here in Kansas City. I work for NOAA. I'm the Regional Climate Services Director here, and we are about ready to begin the August monthly North Central U.S. climate and drought briefing. Today, Brian Fuchs from the National Drought Mitigation Center, as you can see there, hopefully on your screen. We'll be going through a set of slides talking about issues across the north central part of the U.S. There is an elephant in the room, and it's called drought, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And at the end, or actually during the broadcast, feel free, if questions come up in your mind, to write them down in the question zone. There's a little question area in the webinar, or your thoughts in general. We'll try to relay those as best we can at the end. Some of your questions we may be able to answer on the fly. Some we just wait till the end. But please feel free to come up with a list of questions, because we'll have time at the end of the webinar to deal with those. This webinar is being recorded for your information. So Brian, why don't you take it away, and thank you very much.
All right. Hey, thank you for joining today, everyone, and thank you, Doug, for the good introduction. And like he said, if there's a question that we can answer during the presentation, make note of that in the chat. If not, I'll let Doug moderate the questions at the end, and I'll go through my slides here fairly quickly and hopefully leave some time for questions. Like every month, there's a lot of people that come together to bring these webinars to you. I'm coming at you today from the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And as you can see on my title slide here, there's a lot of cooperators from the regional climate centers through American Association of State Climatologists, NOAA, the USDA Climate Hubs, etc., that are all working to bring this out to you regularly. So with that, I will dig in with there it is. Okay. General information today, again, talking about the collaborators and cooperators to put this together. The next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, September 21st at the same time, and Dennis Toddy from the USDA Midwest Climate Hub will be leading that webinar for us. Access to future webinars can be gained by going through that link and registering, and you can find the past webinars on both the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers web pages at the two links provided below as well. So the agenda today, what I'm going to do is talk about some of the current and recent past conditions, some of the regional impacts that have been being felt in the region, general ones, some based on agriculture, and then updates on what's going on up in the Northern Plains and as far as drought goes in the rest of the region. We'll look at the outlooks that just got updated today, as well as taking any questions at the end. So current conditions, and a lot of times pictures can say a lot. This is some pictures of agricultural hail damage that were sent to me from Becky Bollinger out in Colorado. And you can really see the damage that's been being done by some of the more recent severe weather that we've had in the region, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So over the last 30 days, we can see that temperatures have been fairly cool through the region. So this is going from the 18th of July through yesterday. And for most locations, we're seeing a solid 2 degrees below normal during that period, and there are pockets of cooler 3 to 4 degrees below normal readings throughout the region. There are some, you see some yellows out there on that map, and we are seeing that those are near normal to maybe slightly above during that time frame. But as a whole, the region has been cooler than normal since about the middle of July. And looking at precipitation during that time, I have the departure of normal on the left-hand side and percent of normal on the right. And just drawing your eyes to the percent of normal here over the last 30 days, all those purples, even the greens that are out there on the map, and even the yellows, those are right at normal to all above normal. So you do see quite a few areas that stand out through the Dakotas into Nebraska, a lot of Colorado, into portions of Missouri and Kansas, central Minnesota. But then you also see the opposite. The red up in Montana really stands out, as well as what we're seeing in southern Iowa and northern Missouri, as well as in the northern parts of Minnesota and for most of the lower peninsula of Michigan. So it kind of depends on where you are, and the weather pattern has kind of dictated that if you're in an area that has picked up some of these thunderstorms, you have seen quite a bit of rain, and if you've been missed, you've really been missed. Looking at some of those departures, you know, up in Montana this time of year, that departure from normal is only about 1.5 inches below normal. But when you get into northern Missouri, southern Iowa, some of those departures for the last 30 days are reaching, you know, 3 to 4.5 inches below normal during that time. So how did July stack up with the rest of the Julys on record? And at NCEI, we can do a comparison of the state rankings for July with temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. With 120 years of record now, we can see that there was a clear delineation over the western U.S., where a lot of those areas were much above average during that time frame. The high plains, they were above average for the most part for July. And then as you get into the Midwest, most of the conditions were near average. We can see on the precipitation side, definitely out in the eastern Corn Belt through Ohio, Indiana, much above average during that time frame. And then out west, you can see where Colorado came in, top 5. Is that top 5? No, top 10 wettest July on record for them. And a lot of that precipitation has been really on the eastern side of the state as well. Then you go up to the northern plains and see that not only was it top 5 warmest July on record for Montana, but also top 5 driest on record as far as state rankings go. And over in North Dakota, we saw some similar dryness as well. So kind of a tale of two different sides of the region. The eastern side has been wet, fairly cool to near average temperatures in July, and then you go to the north and west part of the region, and we see warmth and dryness. And so how are we seeing these conditions on some of the indicators that we look at? And Quick Dry was something that's been being developed here at our shop and with several partners as they're listed, but it's really looking at this rapid development cycle that can show up quite quickly this time of year. And you really can see some of those wetter areas here in the Midwest and parts of the northern plains, especially if you're east of the Missouri River Valley. But then you see Montana, western South Dakota, even in parts of the Sandhills of Nebraska standing out as an area that's been drier over the last couple of weeks. But then also looking at southern Iowa, northern Missouri, and parts of central Kansas. Some of these areas are really getting picked up well on tools such as Quick Dry, and I'll also throw up here the ESI, the Evaporative Stress Index, that you can see that through these areas not only has that warmth been evident, but also seeing what it's done to the water balance in the region with the successive ET compared to the potential during that time. Again, we can go back a little bit further instead of just looking at the last month, but we can kind of look at what we've seen through much of the summer as a whole. And again, departure from normal precipitation on the left and percent of normal. And really looking at the percent of normal up there in the northern plains, we can see why drought has been an issue up there. A lot of those areas are only 25 to 50% of normal precipitation, with even pockets that are drier during the last 90 days. And those are equating to departures of about 6 inches below normal through a lot of eastern Montana and into portions of North and South Dakota. And then the other area that really stands out, again, is this area in southern Iowa, going up into central and northwest Iowa, and also catching parts of northern Missouri. We're seeing that during this time frame, the last 90 days, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches below normal precipitation, with some pockets, again, of drier conditions in there. and that relates to about 25 again to 50% of normal during that time frame. And the other area I want to pick out is the wet side. And if you look at western Kansas, eastern Colorado, and even into parts of central Nebraska, some of that abundant rain, again, consistently over this 90-day period has really jumped up some of those departures where they're seeing 2 to 4 inches above normal. And then the further east you go, where we get into Indiana and Ohio, where it's been cool and wet throughout the entire growing season, we see that, again, 100 to 150% of normal, quite common, with departures above normal of anywhere 4 to 6 inches, and even pockets of wetter conditions during that time. So I guess what I'm trying to say with these data is we are seeing a mix of conditions depending on where you're at, and there really is a transient zone between the northwest to the southeast portions of the region. And to throw things up for the year to date, again, we see those wet conditions in Kansas and Colorado, portions of Nebraska, and then through a lot of the upper Midwest and the eastern portions. But then you can really see that dry slot that starts up in Montana and goes all the way down into Iowa, that really is showing that this area has consistently missed out on precipitation throughout the entire year. And when we start looking at, for just the calendar year of 2017, some of these departures are in that 9 to 12 inch range depending on where you're at. And percent of normal, especially in the drier locations up in eastern Montana and western North and South Dakota, seeing 25% of normal precipitation for the calendar year is quite significant. And when we talk about the drought conditions a little bit later, it will match up quite well to where we're seeing some of these impacts. So the May through July climate. So looking at this time frame, quite similar to what we saw just in July. Again, the warmth over the west, quite normal as far as temperatures go through much of the Midwest and portions of the plains. And then for precipitation, again, that dryness, that May through July, and both North Dakota and Montana, top 5 dry events, where we see that wetness again over Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, even into parts of Michigan, West Virginia, and Colorado stands out as well. That those pockets that have been wet have been very wet, and those that have been dry have been very dry. And this really shows that it hasn't been just a short-term type of event at this point. So some of the regional impacts that we've seen due to this these types of conditions, again, more recently we've seen quite a bit of severe weather in the region, and that's really has done some damage to some of the agricultural production. And these were shared by some folks up in South Dakota. Looking at the photo on the left, you would think it was winter, the way that hail is piled up, and then just to see how the corn crop was decimated. And that has been one of the things that we have noted, that with severe weather that's been popping up here in the last month, what we're seeing is those areas that are getting impacted by these heavy rain events, but also are getting this hail, and what it can do in a short term to some of the agricultural production in those regions. It's quite amazing to just see how quickly a crop can go from being green and flourishing to be gone. So that's really something that we're pointing out. Some baseball-sized hail in central Nebraska here recently, as well as some widespread flash flooding and high winds as these storms have went through. Again, I've seen photos and been hearing reports of entire fields being washed out that had pretty good stands of corn going in them, and the heavy rains have just really took care of them in a hurry. We've had some flash flooding and high winds in Greeley, Colorado, also, again, central Nebraska and here recently, and then up to 2 feet of hail in Evan, Colorado in 10 to 15 minutes on August 9th. Again, just thinking of, typical summertime events, but then to see the excessiveness of not only the rain, but some of this hail really catches your attention in a hurry, and then what those impacts are, again, especially in that agricultural section or sector. So looking at the Missouri River, We can see that in 2017 on the right-hand side of the storage chart, we're right in the mid-range of where we should be. We're not up where we were in 2011, and we're not seeing some of those minimum flows either. So we're right where we would expect the river should be right now, with about 61 million acre-feet in storage. So really not too much, other than saying that the headwaters to the Missouri River have really been impacted the most by the drought, and really impacting how much water is available and being stored on some of the reservoirs, which is being shown in that the lower left-hand portion of the screen. And as we talk about stream flows, we can see that the 28-day stream flow averages, you're seeing a lot of greens and blues on the map, especially in the Midwest. As you get into the plains, Iowa and northern Missouri again stand out with seeing much below normal stream flows. And then through the northern plains and even the central plains, it's more spotty. And Colorado stands out as well, that a lot of the riverways are well above normal for they typically are for this time of year. Looking at the Missouri River Basin as a whole, we can see that some of those dry readings up in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and then again on the lower reaches as we get into portions of Iowa and Missouri. And then looking at the upper Mississippi, again, just another view, catching what we're seeing in that dryness in Iowa and to parts of Illinois as far as stream flows go. And then we see the opposite. And when we go into the Ohio River Valley, almost everything there is normal to well above normal for this time of year, with only a few spotty gauges showing up. And again, some of those could be based on seasonal management decisions as well. And so we go to the Great Lakes, and we can see that for each of the